There's a lot of discourse online about morning routines, and most of that discourse is easily lampoonable, easily satirized, and mostly annoying. I want to tell you a little bit about my morning routine, not to brag to you about how effective it is or show off at how difficult it is because I get up at 4 a.m. every day, which I do not do, but instead so that potentially you can see a little of yourself in me, which is to say that my morning routine works for me. Your morning routine can work for you, but they're probably not the same. And my goal here is only to show you the steps I went through in order to change my behavior such that you might see a little of yourself in me. Before I tell you about the morning routine itself, I need to tell you a little bit about myself and the change that I decided I needed to make. So for many years of my life, I played professional basketball. And even before that, I played college basketball and high school basketball. And one of the things that is true about sports is that it mostly happens at night, in that the games are played at night. So I became, from the ages of, call it 17 to 34, a night person. Games were played at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock a lot of the time. Practices even were often held in the evening. We traveled late at night a lot. So I got used to a lifestyle that led to a lot of sleeping late, not only because games were at night, but also because I had to rest. I had to do a lot of sleeping. There's a great passage in one of the books by Phil Jackson where he talks about how crazy it was that oftentimes NBA teams, for example, would get their players up for shoot around really early in the morning after arriving at like 3 in the morning, thinking that that would train them to not be lazy and not thinking about just the way that their lifestyle was run. So I had this issue that I had been historically a night person, and now I was changing my life and realizing I needed to become a morning person, in part because I was a member of society, like a normal citizen all of a sudden, and because I had started writing every day, and I noticed that creatively I was best in the morning, not only with the writing that I was doing, but with all of the other stuff that was involved in running businesses and just getting my days going. So that meant I needed to make a change. The other thing that happened around this time was that I realized I hadn't actually done my body many favors when I was playing basketball. So when I played, I was mostly thinking about trying to get enough calories to keep myself going. And I wasn't thinking too hard about the sorts of calories that I was eating, which is a whole other discussion. The point here is that I realized, thanks to some GI distress and some aches and pains, that I need to revamp the way that I was eating. So what this meant was that I set out to get up earlier, I wanted to eat better, and I wanted to get something constructive done to start my day every day, where in my case, that was mostly writing, but also starting to lead into a little bit of entrepreneurship. So here's what I came to. I noticed that I really needed something to look forward to when I got out of bed. At first, this provoked a fair bit of guilt in me because I was thinking, like, imagine my ancestors thinking about this descendant of theirs who was struggling to get out of bed. Like, oh, how hard is that? But I had to come to terms with that, yes, for much of my life, I had been a night person, and so it was kind of reasonable that it was hard for me to get out of bed. So I started thinking about ways that I could create things for myself to look forward to in the morning. One of the first things that occurred to me was I really love listening to full albums of music. So I started doing more buying of music online. This is in the time of iTunes, which is when I started all of this. And so I would really treat myself to albums I wanted to listen to, especially new albums that I might not otherwise buy, as a treat to pull me out of bed. I would listen to those albums while I was cooking my breakfast. The cooking was also new because I had, as I mentioned, not always eaten so well, and a lot of the eating that I had been doing was just cereal and milk and start my day. And now I was realizing I needed to start my day with cooking some eggs and eating something a little bit better for me, something a little bit more robust that also took some time to cook. So that was first job. Get some music to listen to while I was cooking my breakfast that also helped to pull me out of bed. I also, at this time, was starting to just read more about nutrition. So I then built in hot lemon water to start my day, which I noticed also had this knock-on effect of kind of waking me up. It felt a little bit like coffee. I didn't want to drink coffee early in the day for another reason, which was that I wanted to reward myself for getting to a place where I was going to do my writing. So I didn't want to have coffee at the start because that was going to be my reward. You'll notice here that in this, there's a lot of convolution of cues and rewards. So in behavior change, we talk all the time about the cue is what leads into the behavior, then there's the behavior itself, and then there's the reward for the behavior. That's kind of an overly simplistic way to look at it. But you'll see that as I'm doing this, or as I'm talking about this, there's kind of this in and out of cues, then behavior, then reward. So an example might be how first, the hot lemon water was its own behavior that I needed to train, but it actually at a certain point became kind of a reward for getting out of bed in that I started to like it, and it became a cue into this routinization of my morning. So I was starting to build kind of the scaffolding of a morning routine. I would get out of bed, I would put on some music in my headphones, get lemon water, start drinking that, take the eggs out of the refrigerator, get the frying pan ready, and then start into a little bit more of the routine where now I was realizing that because I'd had so many surgeries in my life, in my career, I needed to do some stretching / yoga or my body would hurt, and that isn't fun for anybody. So one of the things that I have incorporated since those very beginning days is that I start with hot lemon water, put on music, lay out everything that I'm going to prepare for breakfast, and then I go down in my apartment building to the gym where I do this fairly rudimentary and light yoga / stretching that lasts between 12 and 15 minutes, where again, I'm rewarding myself after that by coming back and getting to cook and eat my breakfast. So lemon water, music, take the music out, go downstairs, go do the stretching and yoga, come back upstairs, put the music back in, cook my food. And then another thing comes into play, which is that I'm often doing this all by myself, which is yet another debate for another day about how maybe I should have another person in my life, but we'll save that for another time. So I was noticing too that I would get kind of bored while I was eating breakfast. However, I didn't want to turn on TV. I didn't want to access the internet yet because I found that if I want to do something creative and constructive, I need to keep this kind of sacred space before I launch into whatever madness is happening online. So to mitigate this, I started subscribing to magazines that I love. As an example, I would often in airports find myself reading or drawn to this magazine called Foreign Affairs. Doesn't matter what the magazine is really, but I found that it made me feel kind of smart, and in a vain way, it made me think that I knew more about what was going on than was actually true. So I subscribed to that magazine, and also The Spectator, which is a magazine I love. Point is that those gave me yet another reason to get out of bed, get excited about cooking, and then eating this breakfast that wasn't always something I was super looking forward to after so many years of giving myself sugary cereal to start the day. Okay, so then put the music back in, do the dishes, clean up, go about my day, where my day is now a continuation of my morning. I'm going to a coffee shop, usually a place that I know pretty well so that I don't have to think too hard about whether I'm going to find a seat or who the baristas are. Then I do my writing. So my writing is almost always 30 to 45 minutes each morning. And after that, I will kick into something fairly constructive or creative where that probably has something to do with running the business. Along the way, I'm of course drinking my first cup of coffee, which is my reward for getting to the coffee shop and also my cue for getting into the writing and or other constructive stuff. Now, before I finish up, I want to mention that even in that writing session or that constructive work session, I'm cueing myself and rewarding myself. I've created a list of guilty pleasure songs. There's one that's called GP-Rock, R-A-W-K, one that's called GP-Rap, one that's called GP-90s. It's all the trashiest songs that I would never admit to listening to otherwise, but that make me happy. And those are what I use to, again, pull me into a place where I'm happy to be sitting still because I get to listen to this Godsmack song. And then similarly, after I've done my writing for the day, I can listen to whatever I want, even if it's just an NWA song. And then I will switch back into constructive mode with some calming music and then another reward song. And then when this is all finally done, I turn on my phone for the day. And interestingly, that at one point was a reward. But now, because I so enjoy my mornings, it actually feels like something of a curse, which I think is kind of interesting. And which leads me to my final point about all of this. I really like my mornings now, and they, in a lot of ways, feel like a reward in and of themselves. And oftentimes what people will tell me is that they want to start there. They will say to themselves, well, a good morning routine will be its own reward. And that's true after years of doing it. But at first, it's so important to know yourself and to go back to that thing that I was talking about at the beginning. Remember, I mentioned that I felt this guilt around needing to do all of this stuff just to get myself out of bed. But that guilt wasn't really helpful. What I wanted was a better morning routine. And what that meant was that I had to go through all the steps that worked for me. Listening to music, hot lemon water, subscribing to magazines, going to a coffee shop to work instead of trying to do that at home. That's what was necessary for me to overcome this long habituation around being a night person, around being a person who didn't necessarily eat the best kind of breakfast and who didn't necessarily start his day with something constructive. So what that means for you, I think, is this. Potentially, pull some of those ideas out there, but don't pull the ideas out specifically. You don't have to drink lemon water or subscribe to magazines. But what I would charge you with doing is thinking about, what are you trying to overcome? What are the habits that you've built up? What is the amount of guilt that you have around thinking you shouldn't need these things? And instead of thinking this should all be its own reward, have patience with yourself. Know that yes, eventually it will probably become its own reward, but only as you lock into those cues and rewards and behaviors along the way that also will make it kind of fun. And something that's useful, and maybe eventually something that's a morning routine you're so proud of that you annoy people by talking about it on the internet.